Hello, my name is Christopher Scotolaro. That's a mouthful. And I want to talk to you today about two topics that I think need some attention in the state of Vermont and probably throughout the country. And that's the flawed and broken systems and agencies related to DCF and CPS, and what's called de facto parentage statute, which Vermont has and most states have. But before I dive into both of these categories, I want to say that I speak today at PEG TV with this disclaimer. These are all my opinions based on facts, legal and personal, as a social worker in the state of Vermont and out of Vermont for the past 27, 28 years. And my emotional take and oratory today is separate from any of the views that PEG TV might have. So these are my opinions and my words as I know them to be. I know this as truth, and there's not that much truth out there in the country today, is there? Or truth to power. When I transcend, I shall know that in this lifetime, I indeed had been a father to a child in dire need of being called a son. Rutland County Child Welfare Services, DCF, CPS throughout Vermont are broken and flawed. And that's not coming from Chris's hyperbole. If you talk to police, state troopers, case managers, and DCF, CPS staff, that sentiment is widespread. Most of what I'm going to talk about today, the goal is to have a bigger conversation and to create change, or the pathway towards reform on both sides of the aisle, liberal, conservative, whatever your bent is, independent. These issues need to be addressed because they're affecting children. So after the 2017 murder of a DCF worker, Miss Laura Sobel, she was a dedicated employee who removed a child from an unfit mother and then was murdered by that mother. And to her and to others who are doing great work, I dedicate a lot of my discontent about what I've experienced. That should never happen again. The real fear from child welfare staff about violent retribution in the homes and the apartments they go to, where there are credible allegations of abuse, drug trafficking, sexual abuse, neglect, is very real. So I wanted to honor that. And there are key senior staff in Rutland County that I've spoke to who are very, very, very diligent from DCF, who understand that because of that murder and because of fear and because of poor training and maybe old protocols, the welfare of children is not really being met by agencies mandated to do so. So I can start off saying that the person who's most accountable is Mr. Chris Winters, who, as far as I know, still heads the agency. So anybody out there listening to this or cares about it, you can certainly write senators up at the state or Chris Winters himself. Because, again, to go back to what I said in the beginning, DCF, CPS, and my role as this child's de facto parent, non-blood parent for 5 years intersect. And they all intersected in Rutland on 82 Grove. Now, imminent danger is what DCF uses to ascertain whether or not a child or children are in danger when they go to a door knock after a credible non-hearsay report is made. However, imminent danger is also their escape clause. Why? Well, because basically field staff are trained. If I don't see it, it doesn't exist. If I can't prove it, it doesn't exist. But imminent doesn't mean that you're going to see cigarette burns or sexual abuse or violence or neglect or drug trafficking by a mother or father in a Section 8 subsidized apartment or housing. Imminent can mean what happened 5 minutes before the door knock, 6 months prior, 5 minutes after that worker leaves, 6 months to a year. Imminent is not relegated to the immediate present, but that's the escape clause. And if I might be so bold to say in a provocative way, that's what's happening more and more since Miss Sobel's murder. They're allowing children to remain in households as opposed to enacting a vigorous investigation into validated abuse. Physical, emotional, drug trafficking, sex trafficking from a very small percentage of single mothers and fathers in the state. So let me say here, I'm not a misogynist or a chauvinist. I'm not demonizing single parents who are women. I'm actually understanding that there are lots of young women who are raising kids without a father who refuses to participate in the child's care and are doing wonderful with subsidies, SIS, reach up, subsidized housing, etc., mandated psychological evaluations or therapy. They're improving their lives. The young mother and woman that I'm talking about, whose child that I stepped up to raise in 2019, is not that mother. Okay, we're talking about welfare fraud. We're talking about untreated, unmedicated drug addiction and mental illness. I'm also not creating a stigma negatively around drug addiction, rehab, or mental illness. My whole reason for this oratory is that people who are receiving state funding to raise their children, who are committing felonies or misdemeanors in that subsidized house or apartment, who are also not taking care of their mental health because they're not held to an account. There's no quid pro quo or caveats most of the time in order to receive services. For those particular people, they need to be held accountable. The young woman I'm talking about was never held accountable. I raised the child from an infant, 3 months old. And the last time I saw him, he was just shy of 5. So, if and when a child is removed or there's a credible investigation, one of the things that I'd like to see change, because it didn't happen in our case, is that the mother and the children or child need to be psychologically evaluated separately and not in the home or the residence. DCF and CPS seldom does that because they don't have the financial resources to hire in-state or out-of-state competent trauma experts, psychiatrists or child psychologists, MSWs, who understand that trauma comes in all forms. Doesn't have to be overt sexual abuse, beatings, or cigarette burns, etc. Some children don't present. The only way you're going to understand if a mother's actions or inactions and neglect are harming the child is to speak to the child. But those investigations seldom are initiated. And in the case that I'm talking about personally, that I can get more specific in, repeated calls to DCF over the years, and especially between last April 26th of 2024 through last November, repeated calls to DCF by neighbors, myself, and other family members who were tasked and stepped up to raise this boy, and police. DCF did nothing. CPS did nothing to remove the children. Not hearsay, but factual. The child welfare system, in many cases, not all, if I can use that caveat, are broken in the state of Vermont. Now, I left social work after 26 years of serving Vermont families dutifully, youth, children, adults, the elderly. My favorite work of all, special needs clients all over the state. I did it all in all ways for a very long time. And my heart led the charge to help those in crisis. And I performed my work with compassion and a spiritual charter to serve. The one case that I'm speaking of transformed my life. And it also helped me leave the career. I do other things now in and out of the state. Some of it has to do with youth. But I left social work, and I'll never do it again in the state of Vermont. I'm not called to do it. I stepped up to be this boy's non-blood father. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about what de facto parentage is for those who don't understand what fictive or psychological parents are. They come in all forms. You can do your own research online, or ChatGPT will tell you everything you need to know about what a third-party non-parent is. I was a parent. I wasn't a case manager or a social worker or a friend or a lover or an ex-husband or a husband. This was an independent woman who needed incredible amount of support, begged, encouraged, permitted. The boy called me dad. I will always be dad, Chris. Knew my entire family and others that raised him with overt consent. And after 2 court cases to win de facto parentage rights, Superior Family Court could not find the courage and the moral integrity to understand that myself and others met all of the criteria for de facto parentage of a boy that was ripped away. It's called unilaterally severing a bonded parental relationship after 5 years. The location of the mother, I'm not going to discuss. That's too much. Her name and the boy's name will not be mentioned. 82 Grove will be mentioned. And I'm going to go into a little bit more of how her psychosis ramped up prior to the first hearing that led to her leaving the state before that hearing was over, because she wasn't going to be cross-examined and didn't want to really be accountable. With all the evidence that we had in 2 court cases, this court was a disgrace. And with my First Amendment rights, I am going to condemn the court's ruling that completely, like DCF, has banished the only father and family this child ever knew other than his birth mother, who is responsible for neglect and abuse and misdemeanor drug trafficking in and out of that apartment complex. Now, when I say de facto parent, what does that mean? Thousands of dollars financially, living in my home, transport to school, toys, vacations, education. It's completely parenting a child without being the blood mother or the blood father. Many de facto parents are aunts, grandparents, sometimes lovers or exes that have no real blood tie to the child, but were parental in raising the child. What I've learned is that a mother's rights to raise her children is indeed sacrosanct. I will not argue with that. However, if that mother is also committing misdemeanor or felony crime, is receiving thousands of dollars a year in state subsidies, sex work, Or go right down the line. We all know what's happening in Vermont and Rutland County particularly. I mean, I've been around a long time. Why are you still receiving subsidies? Why are there no investigations into those children that are having to suffer that relationship daily? So I just want to be clear. The reticence of the court failed to see mine and others as this child's stable, reliable, consistent, dedicated parent with the mother's overt permission. There was no power over or control. In fact, the mother had all the control. There was no attempt to steal, remove full-time, or to seek custody of the boy, my non-blood son, who called me Dada for 5 years, but I haven't seen in 17 months. That's a key. That's a key. You have to ask yourself, what's the court afraid of? Senator Lalonde created the de facto parentage law, I think around 2016-17, yet the state's not enforcing it. And, you know, the only pat in the back I'm going to give myself is if I'm not a de facto parent, then nobody else in the state is. So, again, let me offer a quote. Children are endangered when parents' substance abuse and/or untreated mental illness interferes with their ability to raise these children and provide a safe and nurturing environment. I and others did that for this particular child and the other two children that came into the relationship later on for 5 years. So the court and DCF and CPF share what I call callous indifference, agency neglect, and it leads me to talk about what's called systemic entropy. So all systems are failing. That's what entropy means. So the court's ability to apply the law, the case law, and not misapply it or misrepresent it with discretion is entropy. Okay? Our case will probably go up to appeal, but I don't have any faith in that. So I'm not going to talk about how to improve the court. It's none of my business. It was an aberrative ruling. DCF, however, they can change. If we had had a full and open investigation into my non-blood son's biological mother, we most likely would have won de facto. That's clear in all the conversations I've had locally with senior staff of DCF, who when we needed them most, when the mother needed them most, when the boy needed them most, failed to act and remove the children in order to help the mother, not punish her. And DCF banished anybody related to raising him. Myself, another person, and everybody else was completely considered irrelevant. The boy had no ability to see the people who he relied on as family. Why? What is it about the protocol? And if they had removed him or the other children, they would have most likely gone to stranger foster parents, not the people who raised him since he was 3.5. From diapers to dinosaurs, to lullabies to Legos, I raised that child like a father. And I do it all over again, in spite of the resistance. That's what the de facto parentage law is all about. But the court in DCF cares not about that. Why? So these are my suggestions for DCF. You have to find the resources independently in and out of the state to hire remotely or in person highly trained child trauma experts to evaluate the children in these door knocks. Your field staff has no credentials, no ability, no training or skills, or the need to interfere. That needs to change. And that comes from you, Mr. Winters, you, Governor Scott, and the senators on both sides of the aisle, excuse me, in Montpelier. Children and a child exposed to any drug addiction or untreated mental illness should be given the opportunity to speak about it so that the parent, mother or father, receives the requisite treatment for whatever malady or diagnosis they have. Not required. Blood relatives and de facto non-blood third-party caregivers like myself must be involved in those door knocks, not banished under some abusive, absurd misreading of HIPAA and confidentiality. So think about it. I raised the child since he's an infant, daily, weekly, yearly, but had no ability to talk about how to help him once the mother severed the relationship because she had to hide all of her malfeasance at 82 Grove. Me and others had no power. Severed, ripped away. That's systemic child abuse by DCF. And I'll go so far as to say the last court ruling is child neglect and abuse by a superior family court. I represented myself pro se this time. And I'll do so in the future. I would think that my suggestions to people like Nancy Miller and others here in town, very competent staff person for DCF, all of the subsidy money that comes into a household for compromised mothers and fathers needs to be tied to caveats that improve their lives. The worst thing you can do is give people money and say, you're not required to do anything to improve your life. It's condescending. Just give them money. They'll be okay. They should be required to do things that are going to improve their children and their own lives. It's the expectations of uplifting yourself out of welfare, which I have no problem with, people. I've been a liberal social worker my whole life, but I left the party. I'm no longer a Democrat or a Republican or a liberal. I've moved away from all of that. But the issue is, I've always been the person who agrees, I'll give you the shirt off my back, but if you don't wear it, I'm going to take it back and I'll give it to somebody else. DCF is broken, Mr. Winters, and I welcome an opportunity to speak to you on the phone, through email, or here at PEG, or any other public forum or private to discuss how your agency that you oversee was more than half responsible for the reason why I can't reconnect with my non-blood son. That's a fact. In the last 5 minutes, I can't wrap this all up. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the psychosis really was last April, when I was given permission to take the boy out of state, which he'd been many times, to see my cousin and my godson. And so the rant and the raving, multiple chronic, paranoid, bipolar, psychotic breakdowns over the years culminated into kidnapping, installing spy cameras in the wall sockets and the alarm clocks and the smoke detectors, and accusing the social service agency she rented from and everybody from her family to us and people in the neighborhood on and on and on, was the breakdown that led to the lawsuits, that led to the courts and DCF protecting a mentally ill, psychotic young woman with 3 children who ended up leaving in the middle of the night in November of 2024, cross country, vanished. Now you tell me how that's protecting children. It's all in the legal case. It's all factual. This is not me creating a false narrative. The false narratives and the mythologies come from all the people in Rutland who protected, condoned, and encouraged this particular mother from fleeing with 3 children in the middle of the night to avoid court and cross-examination. Nobody has held her accountable. I'm holding her accountable now. I will always be Dada Chris. It might take a long time to reunite, but I'll see the boy again. That's been written. And so to the child I know as my non-blood son for the rest of my life, I love you, kid. You're my superhero. You're Spider-Man. You're Peter Parker. You're my guru. You taught me more about love and how to be a man than anybody. And everybody who knows me knows I walk a Lakota walk, the Chankuluta, the Red Road. I just came back from my 4th Sundance out on Pine Ridge Reservation in Porcupine, where I fire tended and I danced this year. So I'm feeling very, very in touch with the spiritual truth of what I'm saying. There's no lying here. My bond with this boy is sacrosanct and eternal. I'm the only father who ever loved you as you deserved. I will stand up in any courtroom, any dais, any street corner, any city hall, any courthouse, any Senate, and advocate for change, not only for the de facto law that I won, but the court denied, but also the problems with CPS and DCF that never helped the mother or the child the way I and others did for 5 years raising him. We're living in an era whereby truth has no real merit anymore, does it? And corrupt agencies are considered to be in right practice. So, in honor of the Sundance, in honor of my non-blood son, and in honor of change and reform, I say, I want to be part of the reform and the change. I don't want to beat up the mother. I don't want to beat up the court. And I don't want to beat up Child Protection Services. I'm calling out what the problems are because nobody else is doing it. I fully expected to have visitation rights and see my boy in the state that he lives in now. But I can't. And someday I will. I will. And that's all I got for now. Again, my name is Christopher Scott Alaro. My Lakota name is Matosapa Nahi Amachiapilo, Spirit Bear, or Shunkachapi Wacha, I bury sacred dog. And I've been a Lakota brother for many, many years. And I will walk and pray and honor the 5 years I had raising this sacred, sacred boy, Hokshi Wakan, till my last breath. I'll see you next time, and we'll do an interview Q&A with a DCF worker, hopefully. Aho, mitako ase, all my relations. Opila. Thank you.